Hello, this is my homework for assignment. And so first what I'm going to do is just walk you through the code, talk about the things that I added and the changes that I made for each video. And then I'll run both the videos so that you can get an understanding of how my code works. So the first thing, I'm just going to walk through what we did in class to show my understanding. And so yeah, first what I did was I took the image right here, frame, sorry, right there, and I snipped it so that it would be more optimal for looking at the road. So basically I just take the frame and trim it down. And then what I do here is I create a mask over the region of interest. I changed this a little bit from class where I made it a little bit wider and shortened it just because I found it to be working better at identifying the lane lines. It reduced kind of the noise of things in front of it. So I just shortened it a little bit. And then what I did was I created a thresholding. So this is what is used to create the grayscale. And so the reason we want to do that is because afterwards, when we're creating and looking at the lane lines, we want it to be in black and white. So reducing the color and making it fully grayscale so that we could go forward and look at it in black and white. And so after this, I end up blurring the image. This helps reduce some of the noise. This was kind of an optional step, but I thought it helped to make my code a little bit more accurate. And then what I did was I used the canny function to identify the edges of the lane lines. So what it would do is it would look for the white in the black and white image that we've created, and then it would essentially identify those edges. Yeah, and so after that, this is my main function. So first what it is doing is it's loading in the video. And then these are some variables I'm just going to use later. However, I had to have them outside of the loop because eventually what's going to happen is as it loops through, it's going to grab every single frame. But because I want my lane lines to be consistent, I had to leave these outside of the loop. Okay, and then this is just grabbing the video file, kind of what we've done before in the last homeworks. And here it's just running through each of the functions I just described to set up the process. So going through snip, mask, thresholding of the image, blur, things like that. And then it's going to show all of these just for my convenience so that I could see to make sure everything was working. And then what it's going to do is it's going to create the huff lines. And so that's working off of the identified edge points. And what this does is it creates lines based on points that we had just identified through the edging process. And here I'm just initializing some variables that I'm going to use for later. Okay, and so this is where we take the row and theta values from the huff lines and we begin to sort them. So in order to identify the left and right lanes, I created a range for which theta values would be identified. So lower theta values from 0.8 to 1.25, I know that would be pointing this way. So it would be left, and the higher theta values would be right. And so I just made some upper and lower bounds for that in order to sort them. So after I begin sorting those, what I do is we're going to get a lot of those lines just because when the huff lines are created, it's basically just going to identify a lot of them. And so what I did from here was I took a median of those in order to find the most accurate huff line for the lane. I did that for both the right lane and left lane. I just did it separately, so I'll walk you through. It's the identical code for both. It's just doing each separately because they need to be done separate before they're plotted. And then what I did was I basically identified to see if there was a median right and median left. And the reason I'm doing this is because if there is no huff lines for the certain frames, say there's no lane lines being identified, if it's kind of like dashed lines, I don't want it to be taking 0 as the median because I actually want it to display a line. So that's just for, I guess, good practice as far as keeping lane lines consistent. And so here is just running through the calculations in order to convert these into lines. I have my A and B values, my X naught and Y naught, and I added these in order to help, I guess, reframe them into the image and just shift them up. And so this is just calculating both of my points for the line that I'm making the each of the lane lines for. And so here, what I do is I'm going to append a list. And the reason that I'm doing this is because I want it to be a mean of all of the previous frames taken. And the reason that I'm doing this is because, like I had mentioned before, if a line doesn't have any Huff values, I want it to still display a lane line. And so I'm taking the previous 40 values, I'm appending their X and Y points. And if it exceeds 40, I begin to write over previous ones. And then what I have to do is, since the Huff lines, since the line function basically just draws a straight line all the way across throughout the entire frame, what I needed to do was create a slope in order to make my own line so that it wasn't exceeding all the way throughout the frame of the image. So I'm just creating my slope here. And then finally, this is for the other side. I don't need to go through that because we just explained it for the other perspective. And then finally, it is just taking these points for the left and right and plotting them in a line form. And so this is just to make sure, this is kind of the conditional that I spoke about before, saying if the point is 0, if there was no Huff line being identified, then use the previous point that will get identified. Okay, and so that's all the code that I did. And then just talking about really quickly the comparisons between the two, the video 2 was much higher in brightness. And so what I did was increase the thresholding value that was used. Yeah, so I used a threshold of 60 here just because it wasn't as bright, but in order to identify the lines, I needed to increase the thresholding for the second video. So I'll show each of those now. This is video 1. And as you can see, it begins to identify those lane lines. It's a little bit shaky because as the points are being taken in, it's differing the mean every single time. So possibly in the future, one thing that I could do to make it less shaky is just taking more points. But I'll let this run. All right, and so as you can see, the video is going to keep going like this. It's mainly straight, so I'm just going to move to the next video now. So let me just quit out of this. So now we do video 2. All right, so this is the brighter one. It takes a second to get calibrated. Yeah, so you can see both of the, it is much brighter, so I did have to change it. And per the rubric, I had also forgot to mention that I made my left lane green and my right lane blue in order to show that I was sorting them separately. And as it changed lanes, it's going to take a second to catch up, just because there's no lines to identify yet as you're shifting. And so it still kind of uses the same lines as before. But yeah, so that's my assignment. Thank you very much for watching. Yeah.